You are now listening to a podcast made in collaboration with the Copenhagen College Radio.
Hey everybody, thanks for tuning in to episode 62 of the Social Media and Politics podcast, bringing you expert insights into how social media is changing the political game. I'm your host, Michael Becerra, political scientist at the University of Copenhagen. Remember, you can always connect with us on Twitter at SMNP Podcast, or swing by our website, socialmediaandpolitics.org. All right, y'all. Thanks so much for tuning in. Today, as we head into the heat of the 2018 U.S. midterm elections on November 6th, I wanted to cover a bit more this peer-to-peer texting technology that I really think is going to be a game changer in this election. And on episode 54 of this podcast, we talked with Thomas Peters about his peer-to-peer texting platform, Rumble Up, which is aimed at Republicans and the right side of the aisle. In this episode, I'm going to speak with Naseem Makiya. He is the founder and CEO of Outvote, which is a peer-to-peer texting platform aimed at Democrats and progressives. Now, there's a couple of key differences between Outvote and Rumble Up. And I think what Outvote is really trying to do is focus on friends rather than just contacts in your phone. And what Outvote essentially does is match contacts in your phone to publicly available voting records. So next to your contacts, you'll actually get an emoji that signifies to what extent that person has voted in the past. So it's kind of like the emojis you'll get on Snapchat. I think it's a super interesting feature. But also, Outvote has released a swing district feature, which lets you know who in your contact list lives in a swing district so you can encourage them to vote. So in this interview, I picked Naseem's brain about the peer-to-peer texting landscape, particularly on the Democratic side of the aisle, to balance out the Republican coverage we did earlier. And while it's still a little bit early to see how effective these technologies will be, if I was a betting man, I would say that these are much more effective than Facebook ads and email campaigns. So without further ado, let me bring on Naseem Makiya. Again, he is the founder and CEO of Outvote. If you want to check out the app, you can visit their website at outvote.io. Naseem, thanks so much for taking the time out and welcome to the Social Media and Politics podcast.
Thanks so much for having me, Michael. Excited to be here.
So can you first start out by giving us a brief introduction to Outvote? What does the app do and why did you decide to start it?
Yeah, so Outvote is basically friend-to-friend texting. So it allows anyone to basically volunteer for a campaign or organization and make a meaningful impact by kind of talking to their friends about it and raising awareness about it. We decided to start it because, frankly, the way campaigns operate right now is they spend most of their budget on ads, TV and radio, now slowly shifting to digital, email, and text messages from strangers. And a lot of it is kind of impersonal and somewhat spammy. And so, what we had seen in the team's experience volunteering and working on campaigns is that what actually works is talking to people, having real conversations face to face. That's what actually turns people out to the polls. So if you look at the numbers, the campaign methods they're currently using kind of work for persuasion and a little bit raising awareness, but don't move the needle on actually turning out voters. So, what does move the needle is what your friends are doing, what your peer group is doing, and real conversations you've had with candidates. And so we decided to build something that could maybe scale that in an efficient way.
Right. And it's specifically focused on peer-to-peer texting, right?
Yeah, so peer-to-peer texting, I guess, it gets used kind of a lot in the space, but a lot of people call these kind of text messages you get from strangers peer-to-peer, which I suppose it is, but it's not friend-to-friend. So there's a bit of a distinction there. When you send text on Outvote, it's coming from your own number to a friend that's in your contact book that presumably you're in their contact book as well. So it's a little bit different from, these kind of texts you get, hey, it's Joe from the campaign, are you going to vote?
Right. So it's going even a step beyond just contacts. It's ideally someone who is actually your friend.
Right.
Got it. And one of the things I think is super interesting is that you've recently released this swing district feature. So can you describe how that works and why you're focusing on swing districts in particular?
Yeah, well, the way it works is when you get download the app, we sync your contacts to a national voter database of over 260 million people. And what we're doing is try to find where your contacts are registered to vote so we can tell you a little bit more about them. If they voted in the past, if they've missed a midterm, which is pretty common. So you may want to send them a reminder if that's the case. And now we've released this swing district feature, which is really cool because one of the most compelling ways for people to make an impact is to get out the vote in swing districts where they feel like, it's really critical if people don't vote. And a lot of times people feel like, okay, hey, I live in this really strong blue state or really strong, red state. It doesn't really matter as much. But you've got about 500, most people have about 500 contacts in their phone, give or take. And a lot of those folks do live in critical swing districts. So you can make an impact that way. So people are really excited to say, okay, pull up the app and tell me who I know in one of these critical districts where the election could be decided by a handful of votes.
Right. And those, I'm curious because if we think about other forms of campaigning, like TV ads, for example, people in swing districts are just getting pummeled with paid media, online and also on TV. Do you think that this texting medium is a way to kind of slice through that, or does it add more noise to the campaigning?
Well, so again, I think it comes to this differentiation that we have with friends. So I think peer-to-peer texting initially, maybe a few years ago, was kind of novel and it felt more intimate. It felt like, oh, this person's really taking the time to chat to me on this channel. I think we're starting to see it become a little bit more lost in the noise, a little bit more like expected and ignored. And, people are just getting blasted with these texts as well, which is sort of why we built Outvo, which is, you're not going to blast your friends and spam them all over the place, or people and you have relationships with. You're going to actually have a conversation with them. And it turns out that that's what actually works. So if we can kind of prove this works effectively, and we actually kind of have already in the primaries, maybe we can start getting campaigns to shift that budget away from these kind of, a little bit more annoying tactics to kind of a more digital grassroots conversations between friends tactics.
Right. And I want to dive into all the specifics of the app. First, how do you see it fitting into an overall campaign strategy? I mean, campaigns are, as we kind of talked about before, they're shooting out paid media on TV, they're doing online campaigning on social media. How do you see P2P strategically used in that overall campaign apparatus?
So there's a difference between how I'm seeing it being used and how I think it should be used. But, and I think that's partly because it's new and people are still trying different things and figuring it out. So how I'm seeing it being used is kind of these very short bursts, like a ton of text at once. Just to be specific, this is not Outvo. So this is peer-to-peer texting. Kind of you upload a list of contacts that you either bought or have cultivated over time, and then you're kind of texting them from an unknown number. And so I see this kind of like just bursts going out with very low response rates and a lot of people getting annoyed or upset and wanting to unsubscribe. And I think the correct approach would be to use text to actually have a conversation on a channel where people are really comfortable and responsive and maybe willing to chat, throw a few texts back and forth about an important subject. And so, we do see that with friends, and we see less messages going out for friends. Like people don't just sign on and just send to every single person in their contact list. They go through the list, they pick who they want to talk to, and then they actually kind of talk to them. So it's a lower throughput, but a higher quality conversation. And I think that it's much more impactful because of that.
Yeah, and I wanted to ask you exactly about that impact. I was looking at your Twitter feed, and there were a couple different figures in terms of the effectiveness of outvote. So I saw in some cases 10% more likely to vote, in some cases double. How are you measuring effectiveness, and what type of impact are you seeing so far?
Yeah, so the double metric was from our initial pilots, and so to be honest, it's a great metric, but it's a little bit biased. We were on the ground. We were based in Cambridge and Somerville. We worked with campaigns. We were at all the texting parties physically, and we were pretty much giving it to activists, folks we knew who were already going to vote and tell their friends. And so it was a little bit biased, but it was a way of proving out the concept. So since then, we've gotten a lot more strict, and we're doing kind of randomized controlled studies. And so that's why the number has dropped a little bit to 10%, but it's still really exciting because we knew that number wouldn't hold its scale, but if you compare it to door knocking, when you actually get someone at the door and you get a conversation with them, they're usually about 8% more likely to vote. So a single text from Outvote makes a friend 10% more likely to vote. So not only is it significantly more effective than when you actually get a conversation at the door, but it's way more scalable. In like 5 minutes, you could do 2 hours worth of canvassing. Usually when you're out there door knocking, you'll talk to maybe 5 or 6 people an hour. So it could be a total game changer. campaigns really, really commit to it and commit to it kind of earlier in the cycle.
Right. Are you getting that number, the 10%, from matching it to voter registrations, or is it kind of through trials where you're surveying?
No, so we match them to the voter file. So now we can see, after the primaries, we can see, okay, did they actually go vote? We contacted them and they did, or we didn't contact them and they didn't. So we're getting, their real numbers from whether or not the people being contacted on the platform are actually then going and voting.
Gotcha. Super interesting from a political science perspective. So I wanted to ask, with any form of new campaigning, there's, a bunch of startups that are kind of trying to lead the charge and consulting campaigns about how to use the new technology. So on the Democratic side of the aisle, there's also a P2P platform called Hustle. So what are the key differences between Outvote and Hustle?
Yeah, it kind of went into it a bit already, but it's basically this core difference of peer-to-peer versus friend-to-friend. So Hustle, when you buy Hustle, and it's great for what it does. They've done an amazing job. But basically, you're uploading a list of contacts that you already have sourced from somewhere, and then you're texting through them. And that text comes from an unknown number, presumably from a campaign staffer trying to engage them. And you could use Hustle in really interesting ways that I think some campaigns, are doing this year. I think the Beto campaign is actually doing this, where they're actually trying to have a conversation with people. But a lot of times it just gets used to blast out a reminder or a call to action that's kind of a one-act transactional thing. Outvote, you are not, there's no list of numbers, there's none of that. You are deciding which of your friends you think would like this candidate or be interested in this candidate, or even if you haven't talked to them in a while, live in a swing district and you're like, I really got to just do my part and just remind this person, if they download Outvote and they live in this district, they probably know a ton of swing voters, and they might be able to help. And that's one way I can make an impact, aside from donating or volunteering my time, which are both, really big asks for people.
Yeah, and I wanted to ask about Outvote's target audience, because there were two kind of features of the app that I noticed that I would think it's geared towards millennials. The one is that there are these emojis that are included next to your contacts, kind of like the Snapchat streak feature. And I want to ask you about that more in detail in a second. But also the fact that Outvote doesn't have a web client, so it's only downloadable on a phone. So those two things together make me think that it's geared towards a younger millennial type audience. Is that right?
I wouldn't say I wouldn't say that's who we want to use it necessarily. We're actually running into a lot of older folks downloading it as well. A lot of campaign staffers and volunteers are older. So, it's important to us to make it as broad as possible and as usable as possible for folks who aren't necessarily tech savvy, who aren't necessarily younger. But we have found that, most of our users right now are between the ages of 20 and 35. And that's part of it, just the fact that it's an app, the fact that it's tech. And if you were to do it on web, obviously you wouldn't have phone contacts then, so you might have to do email contacts or something like that. We kind of thought email just wasn't as good a channel as text. It's easier to ignore, and people are already getting even more kind of junk mail.
Gotcha. But I want to zero in on these emojis because I think they're great. Can you describe a bit how emojis are integrated into the platform, like why you chose them and kind of what they do? I think it's super interesting.
Yeah, so we chose emojis to make it fun. Basically, what we do in the app is, depending on your voting record, we'll give you a little emoji. So if you've never voted, it'll be sad and maybe crying. And if you voted a bunch, maybe there'll be like a smile and hearts in the eyes. And if you kind of are, you miss some midterms and only vote in presidentials, you might get like a discerning emoji. I don't even know the names of them all. So the point is we wanted to make it like a little fun, a little bit playful, because, it is an ask for folks to text their friends, right? For some folks, it's even more comfortable to remind just a total stranger to vote, and then they don't have to ever talk to them again. But to talk to your friends is like, they're your friends. You're asking them to kind of, remind them of something. And sometimes, specifically in America, talking about politics can be uncomfortable. And now when we're kind of more divided than ever. So we wanted to kind of make it a little bit playful, get folks into this idea that you're not like shaming your friends. That's not the point. It's just to kind of, send them a friendly reminder and say like, hey, this, it's basically a civic duty now to vote at this point. And if you're going to sit out, at least have thought about sitting out. Don't just forget or not know where your polling place is.
Right. Have you, just out of curiosity, have you done any sort of trials with and without emojis to see if they juice people's likelihood to text?
No, we haven't. We haven't got that into analyzing emojis yet. So far, people like them. So we for most of our feedback, we're talking to our users daily. The whole team talks to users daily. But we do have analytics, but we haven't run that A/B test yet.
Gotcha. I think it'd be an interesting one. So what type of text are campaigns able to send through Outvote? Is it SMS, MMS, either or, depending on what the campaign wants to use?
So campaigns don't get to do the actual sending. Campaigns just get to provide templates, prepared templates that users can then use. At the end of the day, it's the user's contact, so they can send whatever they want. But the campaign can put here's a little template if you want to remind your friend, here's how to find their polling place. Here's a template if you think they might want to learn more about the candidate and go to their website. Here's another template to say, hey, voting is in 7 days, don't forget, et cetera. So they have control over these prepared messages, but you as a user can go in and edit them. So the campaigns don't get to just send whatever they want to anyone.
And so if you're a user then, first let me ask, how much does the average text cost through Outvote?
Yeah, so the average text list price is about 2.5 cents, and then discounted from there.
Because I was wondering if, let's say a user decides to send a picture associated with the text, is that going to cost the campaign more because it's higher level technology?
No, not at this time. But campaigns can't put prepared pictures in yet, so the user would have to add that themselves.
And then would the campaign get billed, or would the user get billed through their plan? I'm just curious how it works.
So the text comes from the user's own number, so they're paying for that text message through their data plan, or if they have unlimited, it's just part of that. The campaign is basically paying for, it's not exactly matched to our costs. So our costs actually come from matching your contacts to the voter file, which is a really difficult thing to do. So we're kind of doing all sorts of kind of tricks to basically find, okay, what is this person's correct first and last name? Where do they live? Of these 260 million people, unless their name is pretty unique, it's a lot of work to match them to the file, in addition to some of the other services we provide campaigns like push notifications and stuff. So the pricing, isn't directly correlated to our costs, but actually is more correlated to kind of what campaigns are used to seeing. So they're used to kind of okay, we price by message, with Hustle. So this makes sense for Outvote, and we're able to budget for it. But, we also offer per user pricing, depending on how many folks are actually on there volunteering for them. So we're a little bit flexible on that, but we're mostly tailored it to kind of what they're familiar with.
Gotcha. So I asked a bit about differences between Outvote and Hustle, which is kind of on the Democratic side. And I want to switch over to comparing Outvote to some of the apps that Republicans have put out. So we interviewed Thomas Peters and his P2P platform Rumble Up, and that's geared towards helping Republicans. So how do you see the P2P services between Democrats and Republicans ahead of the midterms? Does one side have the upper hand over the other in terms of adopting this technology?
It's a great question. And a couple of folks have asked me, and I don't know enough to kind of have a strong opinion on it. I actually, have been reading up a little bit more about it since then, and I don't know too much about Rumble Up. I think it's pretty similar to kind of Hustle for Democrats, but I do know that a lot of, there's an article recently in the New York Times, I think, kind of detailing how Republicans are basically building all these white labeled apps that are kind of all the same, but per candidate or per cause. And, I don't have a lot of insight into how that's going. I think it'll be one of those things where we'll find out how much of a role it played more after, because you start finding out the extent to which campaigns and organizations use these tools. So it's tough for me to tell. I don't know. So I'm kind of learning about Republicans in real time as much as anyone else is, to be honest.
Right. Yeah. Because I think, and that's one of the things we talked about, is that it's quite an old technology, but the way it's being used now is quite novel. So I think it is too early to actually see which side is using it better. But I do want to ask, following up something from that episode, which Thomas was saying that the reason that text messages are being used this election cycle is because there's basically been found a loophole in the law that there's this Telephone Consumer Protection Act, which sort of bans robo and mass texting. And so I wanted to ask about the regulatory environment around texting for campaigns. I mean, currently it's legal, but do you see it changing moving into maybe 2020? Because there have been some lawsuits already filed for spam texts in Texas, for example.
Yeah, I could definitely see it changing. I don't know that it would be, I don't think it would be like necessarily banned outright. I think it'll probably be a little better protected. To be honest, I'm not sure what that'll look like, but that is what's happening is that, per FCC regulations, you have to send the text one by one, and political, getting out the vote is a protected action. So it doesn't have to be opt-in. And so campaigns are able to kind of, I don't know if they're getting around it. They're operating within it, but that's just the way it's been written right now. And so I could see that changing. It doesn't affect us as much because, like I said, we're friend to friend. This person is already, they're both in each other's phone contacts, and they, presumably text each other, have texted before or text each other all the time. And so it's quite different from this issue. I don't think we'll be affected by that basically because of the way we work. That's something that, Rumble Up and Hustle will probably have to deal with.
Gotcha. And I wanted to ask, I mean, obviously this is focused very much on Democrats and U.S. politics. So I was trying to download the app myself with a Danish number, and I got the link to do it. I downloaded it, but I couldn't verify my number because it wasn't a U.S. number. So I wanted to ask, would this app work in Europe and other national contexts, or are regulations like GDPR maybe limiting the transportability of this technology to other national contexts, such as the EU?
Yeah, so we've had folks ask actually for us to deploy in like Switzerland and Germany. We haven't looked into it too much. We definitely are thinking of when we want to take this product international. But that's the first thing we would have to kind of look into is every country, what regulations, telecommunication regulations affect this. And to be honest, it may even be a non-starter for some places because not every country has public voting records like we do in the U.S. So in certain countries it may work, but there's a lot of homework to do before we can make that decision.
Definitely. Well, Naseem, I'm sure you're busy as we are right in the thick of the midterms. But thanks for taking the time out and coming on the podcast. Appreciate it.
Of course. Thanks so much for having me, Michael.
I've just been speaking with Naseem Makiya, founder and CEO of Outvote. You can visit their website at outvote.io. And that's a wrap for this episode of the Social Media and Politics podcast. Thank you again for tuning in. Next time, I'm going to be speaking with Dr. Marco Bastos. He is Senior Lecturer in Media and Communications at City University in London, and we're going to be talking about his research on botnets during Brexit. So make sure you're subscribed to get that directly into your feed. I'm your host, Michael Becerra, signing off from Copenhagen. See you next time.